What came to be known as the Texas City disaster of 1947 actually started with a small fire. The SS Grand Camp had docked at the port of Texas City on April 11th and actually stayed at the dock for 5 days before they began loading the ammonium nitrate onto the ship. The morning of April 16th, 1947, the day crew arrived and started loading the ammonium nitrate into the cargo holds. Prior to docking at the port of Texas City, the ship had stopped in Belgium to pick up small arms ammunition. As the day crew was loading the cargo onto the ship, they noticed fumes rising from the cargo holds. They removed some of the boxes and noticed there was a fire on the ship. Of course, they proceeded to attempt to put out the fire themselves, were unsuccessful. So they started loading the ammonium nitrate at 8 a.m. By 8:25, the day crew notified the fire department of the fire. The fire department arrived at the docks, attempted to begin to put out the fire. The crew, knowing that there was ammunition on the ship, feared an explosion, so they left the docks. The captain remained on the ship, attempted to put out the fire by pumping steam into the cargo holds. At the time, it wasn't known that liquefying ammonium nitrate would create a volatile substance called nitrous oxide, which is even more combustible than ammonium nitrate fertilizer. At about 9:15 a.m., the first explosion at the port of Texas City occurred. Much of the surrounding area was flattened. After the initial blast at the port of Texas City, the 27 firefighters and the fire chief who had arrived at the docks to help put out the fire on the SS Grand Camp were all killed instantly. At that time in Texas City, there was a telephone operator strike when they were attempting to put out calls from the docks to call for assistance from people outside of the city. The calls were not going through. It wasn't until the telephone operators heard of the explosion, knew what was happening, and returned to work that they were able to deploy the Texas National Guard, Marines, and the Navy in the area, as well as reach UTMB in Galveston to have doctors and nurses deployed to Texas City because there was no working hospital in the area. The initial blast from the SS Grand Camp at the port of Texas City actually registered on a seismograph in Denver, Colorado. And then 40 miles north of Texas City in Houston, windows were blown out of a few buildings in the downtown area. Following the initial explosion of the SS Grand Camp at the port of Texas City, there was another ship docked adjacent to the Grand Camp, which was the High Flyer. The cargo on that ship was also ammonium nitrate as well as sulfur. Those two substances combined are extremely volatile and can result in a very dangerous fire. At the time, the Texas City Mayor, Curtis Trahan, had appointed the vice president of the Texas City Railway Company to oversee the relief efforts following the first explosion. Once Sandberg became aware of the fire on the High Flyer, he ordered the crew to de-anchor the ship so that it could be tugged away from the port. Unfortunately, after repeated efforts and a lot of time spent trying to lift the anchor, they were unsuccessful. The High Flyer was drifting closer to the Grand Camp, which had itself kind of been flung towards the High Flyer. The area had been cleared, and then the crew had chosen to leave the port at that point. So around 1:15 a.m., the High Flyer detonated. KTHT, a news broadcasting company in Houston, was actually in the area when the explosion occurred and was able to cover it live on the radio and describe the explosion as lighting up the area as if it were broad daylight. And that was the strength of the explosion. Following the second explosion of the high flyer at the port of Texas City, debris and shrapnel was launched from the docks back into the fires that had been burning since the first explosion. The damage between the first explosion and the second was hard to track because there was just so much flattened area, a lot of ruins, and a lot of fires. It's estimated that between 500 and 600 people were killed by the blasts. Thousands of people were injured. It was difficult to identify bodies because of the severe injuries sustained due to fire and the explosions. Efforts to identify people stretched out into mid-June of 1947. This explosion at the Port of Texas City is known as the worst industrial disaster in history. A lot of regulations were set in motion following the disaster, and it's still used today, both domestically and internationally, as an example of initiating regulations and recovery after an extreme industrial disaster similar to the one in Texas City.